Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from Innova.Buzz, and I'm really excited today to welcome to the Innova.Buzz podcast from Mountain View in California's Bay Area, Ashley Faus, a marketer, writer, and speaker, and the author of Human-Centered Marketing, How to Connect with Audiences in the Age of AI. Ashley spends her days designing marketing that actually helps people solve real problems. Welcome to the Innova.Buzz podcast, Ashley. It's a real privilege to
Yeah,
have you
thanks
here
so
as
much
my
for
guest.
having me. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Excellent. Now, before we dive in, quick orientation for our listeners, particularly if you might be first-time listener on the Innova.Buzz podcast. We explore how people create impact through human-centered conversations. And today with Ashley, we're going to focus on human-centered marketing in the age of AI, how skills develop from 101 to 801 work, which is something she described to me in our pre-call, and what happens to trust and judgment when AI can generate almost anything on demand. It's something that I've been puzzling about a lot recently and just wrote an article again yesterday on. Now, we'll wrap up with our signature buzz round, 3 rapid fire questions I ask every guest. And as always, all the resources and highlights will be in the show notes so you can easily revisit anything that sparks your curiosity. Ashley, I'm particularly looking forward to the conversation because I think you've got a very clear and somewhat contrarian view on AI and skills and skill development, and that's something that I'd love to explore today. I like that you care deeply about the lived experience, and we talked about you photographing a mosque ceiling in Istanbul on our pre-call and taking your own imperfect photograph rather than just buying a postcard. And I think that's a great metaphor because all things occupying my thinking at the moment around AI tend to focus on this whole idea of the lived experience versus generating something that is almost indistinguishable from the outcome that I myself might have done. So to begin with, and to give our listeners a sense of your North Star, can you share with us the purpose that drives your work and the mission and also the impact you're aiming to make today?
Yeah, so many things to unpack with kind of the examples, and I'll have to read your latest article because that sounds right up my alley. I think from a purpose standpoint, this is something that has always shaped how I approach marketing, and that is my job as a marketer is to connect basically problems with solutions for people. And yes, doing that will drive business impact. It'll increase revenue, it'll increase pipeline, it'll increase leads, right? Like that's all great. But ultimately, if I do not solve problems for people, I'm not going to make any money. And that includes, from a holistic standpoint, going out to the market and saying, what are the actual problems? What are the gaps in the solutions today? And how do I bring those insights back into the organization to affect the solutions we build? And then once we actually build those solutions, take it back out to the market and say it in a way that the market understands. I've built a solution for your actual problems. And then if I haven't, be honest and say, hey, I can't solve your problem. Maybe that's not my market. Maybe the product's not there yet. Maybe the offering is, too big or too small for their budget, right? But really thinking holistically about matching problems and solutions for people.
Yeah, I love that. And it's very human centered in the aspect of, first of all, understanding what is the problem and then um, speaking to the people. Once you believe you've identified the problem and solved the problem and produced a product or a service that addresses the problem, then going out to the market and explaining it to them in a way that's not just buy my product, trust me, buy my product, speaking at them, rather helping them understand, okay, we know your problem, here's how we understand your problem, and this is what we've come up with as a solution.
Exactly.
Yeah. Um, Given that kind of purpose, how do you see the idea of kind of developing that understanding, particularly in this age of AI? And I know you talked to me about kind of going through the steps of the fundamentals of understanding and then up to the higher levels of, high expertise levels.
Yeah, so I think one of the hard parts is people are treating AI as if it is something more than a tool. And the reality is that while it is great to help with customer research, it's great to help you hone your ideas. It's great to help you adapt your tone. It cannot do the thinking for you, and it does not have that lived experience. And so, particularly, and this is something I've been quite passionate about thinking about for developing my team and developing the next generation of marketers. The way that I got to where I am and the way that I solve what I call, let's say 801 level problems is I worked in marketing for the last 15 years and I started with the 101 level work. And then once I was capable at doing that, I moved up to 201 and 301 and beyond, right? And the problem is the discussion right now is very focused on giving the 101, 201, even 301 level work to AI. And that means that we're taking away the learning opportunities for the next generation of marketers to cut their teeth on that work to then be able to do, 401, 501, et cetera, type of work. So it's really interesting because I think I've had some of these discussions with folks and they've said, but what if AI fundamentally changes the nature of the work and the skills required such that we don't actually even need the 101 level skills? And I see this a lot, right? When PowerPoint, Word, Excel, email, right? When those, Outlook, when those tools first hit the market, it was a differentiator on your resume to know how to use Excel or know how to use PowerPoint or know how to use Outlook, right? I would never see that as a differentiator on a resume from somebody who's currently graduating college. Like if you don't have a basic understanding of
Yeah.
Excel and like you don't know how to use email, like we got bigger problems, right? Like you shouldn't you shouldn't put, proficient in G Suite on your resume, right? So there are some skills that AI is going to eliminate or make them so ubiquitous that you wouldn't put them on your resume, right? But um I do think it's a hard conversation to have about in 10 years, if we have not given that junior cohort the opportunity to learn because we've outsourced everything to AI, we're going to have this huge gap in the next decade with all of the senior level marketers who don't know how to troubleshoot, who don't know how to spot when AI is hallucinating because they've never had to go find or make the truth themselves, right? So it's it's a worthy discussion to talk about efficiencies and the shift in terms of the skills and knowledge that the next generation needs. But we do need to be cognizant that at least the way so far we've gotten there and the way our senior individual contributors and our senior managers work today, we figured all that out by going through the process and working our way up that knowledge ladder.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating point. And I was having a conversation with Mark Schaefer the other day, so a prolific writer, and he's definitely writing a lot about AI and marketing these days. And one of the things that he said was when he writes a book, it takes him over a year, I think he said, and he goes through this process of really digging in, in his own mind, digging into the topic and researching it, and then coming up with the ideas, the theses that he talks about, and writing and rewriting, editing, cutting, and adding, and so on. And he said the first time he used ChatGPT, he I think he wrote an essay or he just completed a book, and he asked ChatGPT to kind of write something, and he was absolutely petrified by the result because it nailed it really perfectly, but there was something missing, and it was in his heart and in his mind the process that he normally goes through wasn't there, and so it's sort of hard or it was hard for him to describe, although, and I find the same, it's hard to describe what is it that's missing. But in terms of the reader then that's reading that book, they sense that that part is missing. One of the things that I'm conflicted about a lot is I always tell myself I'm a slow learner. I have all these epiphany moments where, and it's sort of the penny drops, one of these moments. And I thought, man, if I had known that a year ago, I could have done all these things differently. And I think if AI can actually give me that knowledge back a year ago, what would that do? And I guess it's in a ways what you're describing. It's the penny. The penny didn't drop just magically. It dropped because I've gone through all these steps over that 12 months, and somehow everything sort of fell into place. And suddenly I realized, that's the knowledge. That's the explanation. And I'm thinking, how do you get AI to give you that, but at the same time still develop that cognitive critical thinking skill that says, I'm not sure that's right, or I wonder if there's another way to do this better, or questions like that. And that's always something when I use AI, I think, how much am I diluting my cognitive abilities here?
One thing that's interesting about that, I've seen some research talking about basically some of the differences with Gen Z, obviously, now that they're such a prevalent force in the workplace. And because they have always had access to, the full corpus of human knowledge, right? They have a smartphone, they grew up with them, right? I'm an elder millennial, and so I distinctly remember when I got my first cell phone, and it was not a smartphone, right? I distinctly remember when we got internet at my house, and it was dial up, and you had to, basically announce like, okay, I'm taking the phone line out. You can't. Does anybody need to call? Right? Um, and Gen Z never had that. They always had internet at home. They always had smartphones, right? And so there is there have been, some research that shows that there's basically that gap already in critical thinking because the answer in theory is always available. You can just Google it. And so the sense that if the answer is not immediately available, oh, okay, there's no answer. And you're like, well, no, there's clearly an answer. You just have to go find it. You have to dig a little bit more, right? And I think that's gonna be the hard part with AI, to your point, where you ask and you don't know if it's hallucinating or not, right? And I remember, I mean, even just basic stuff. So I've planned a number of parties in my life, right? Baby showers and bachelorette parties, and I was planning my launch party for my book. And so I was trying to ask AI how many drinks and different types of drinks that I should get. So I'm not really a beer drinker, so I'm like, I don't know, I should get a mix of beers, but, like, what kind of beer do people drink? Here's the food I'm having, here's the wine I'm having, right? Here's how many people, here's the water, here's the Cokes, right? And so it starts, walking me through, and I'm like, "Okay, this seems reasonable," but then it gives me the final, like, shopping list, and I'm like, "Is that the right number? Like, that seems like a lot of beer. Did you factor in the amount of wine that I'm getting? Like, I don't really think I need that much alcohol," you know? And it was like, "Oh, good catch. I didn't." And it's
Yeah.
just like, I'm not even a beer drinker, but I have been to enough parties, I have hosted enough parties that I kinda intuitively know I don't need 200 beers for a party with 50 people when I'm also having, what? Like, it's a lot of beer. We don't need that much, And so it it was an interesting moment because I'm like, I don't even this isn't even really my wheelhouse, but I have enough critical thinking skills and I have enough lived experience to be like, "Did you? Are you sure you calculated that right?" And it, of course was like, "Oh, you're right. I didn't," Um, so I don't know. I think it's an interesting thing. One other thing that I've seen too, I'd have to remember. I don't have my source off the top of my head for the citation. So again, maybe I'm hallucinating, but there's some research that has shown that basically the average Google search is somewhere between 3 and 5 words, and the average prompt in, ChatGPT, Gemini, etc., is more like 20 to 25 words. And so if you look at the types of queries people ask from a search perspective, it tends to be very factual, what is the definition of this? I need to convert grams to ounces, those types of things. Versus whenever you prompt AI, you tend to want to have that conversation. You are trying to do that problem solving. So I think even that initial kind of research in the nature of how people are searching is changing. I think that does indicate that we recognize that we gotta massage the conversation with AI. And there is still a little bit of that, like, okay, is this the right, am I framing this the right way? Right. Um, but it is really hard. I think we're so early in the adoption cycle, even though we're at like peak hype cycle. I think the adoption cycle and the hype cycle are still quite far apart. They're getting closer, but we don't know the nature of the changes or the gaps just yet because we haven't had enough time. And you still have so many people in the workforce, right? Like for my nieces and nephews, they're Gen Alpha. So for them, they're AI native, right? Versus Gen Z was basically internet native versus millennials were not. And so I don't know what it looks like for Gen Alpha, where they've had an Alexa or a Siri in their house since birth. Like they've always been able to just call out
Yeah.
and a voice will answer them with a question.
Yeah. It's fascinating. You touched on something there that it sort of sparked a thought in my mind as well. And I think the power with a lot of these large language models in particular is the conversation. And rather than just asking a prompt, I need to plan for this party. How many drinks do I need? Then having that conversation and saying, well, actually, half of the party goers are teetotalers, so I'm not going to need that much. Or the other half are going to be drinking wine, or they might be from a particular country. So what sort of beer appeals to people from that country? Those conversations, because what occurred to me is that going back pre-internet, way back in the early days, I'm a baby boomer, so I remember those days when we didn't have that stuff. We had to go to the library and take our library card and read books and newspapers. We had conversations with people all the time, and people would tell us things all the time. Somebody would say to me, for example, if you're planning a party, you'll need 5 beers for every person because otherwise you might run out. And I might respond to that, but I've also got kind of a bottle of wine for every person, and it's actually cold. So my experience is people typically don't drink as much beer when it's cold. And I know half the people are wine drinkers, they're not beer drinkers. There's the conversation that brings in that fact checking. And I wonder if we're losing some of that or forgetting some of that, because that's kind of almost natural human behavior. People are saying things to us all the time. We've got politicians telling us stuff and they want us to believe it. And we tend to push back and say, I'm not really sure I agree with that, or I'm not really sure that's right. So why are we not doing that with the AIs?
Yeah, I do think it's an interesting thing, right? I travel a fair amount. I'm not as well traveled as some, but and living in the Bay Area, it's a very diverse area. So there's folks from all over the world. I hear all different kinds of languages. I eat all different kinds of food, right? I'm at a large company. We have global presence. So I have colleagues from India and Australia and, other places in Europe, right? All over the United States. And I think that diversity of human exposure and human experience, that is a key driver for keeping me grounded and keeping me focused on not curating such an echo chamber. And I think that's going to be a huge skill going forward is how do you find other humans and other experiences so that you can gut check those things, right? Um, it's also funny too, right? Like I've tried to everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, use AI to plan a date night." And I'm like, "AI is terrible at planning date nights," right? Like by the time I have to give it this whole thing where if I just say like, "Where should we go for dinner tonight?" Okay, the AI doesn't know that we had Thai food for lunch, so we don't want to go to a Thai restaurant for dinner. It doesn't know that we have spaghetti leftovers in the fridge, so we don't want to go to an Italian restaurant. It doesn't know that, one of us is trying to cut carbs, so we don't want to go to a pizza place, right? Like, and it's like, well, of course not. You have to tell it that. And I'm like, "Okay, but my husband knows all of that." And so if I ask him, "Hey, where should we go for dinner tonight?" He knows, like, "Oh, maybe we go to a seafood restaurant." Like, he's much more likely to get it because he has that lived experience of what we ate for lunch and what we have in the fridge and what our fitness goals are, right? So, um, I I think people are starting to recognize that, like, the human preferences, by the time you prompt AI with all of that, you've kinda missed the point. Like, the point is not to get AI to live your life for you or tell you how to
Yeah.
live your life, and the more you have other people where you're having those real conversations, you have relationships, you see how they live, the more you realize there's a lot of different ways to live, there's a lot of different food to eat, there's a lot of different places to explore, and so maybe AI does not actually have all the magic answers. I think the antidote is more human relationships and engagement. And obviously, I'm very extroverted, and I wrote the book called Human Centered Marketing. So of course, I'm highly biased to say this, but funny enough, I think having these in smaller interactions is also going to become more of a trend. So you're starting to see this from a, marketing event standpoint. People are having more intimate dinners with, only 5 or 10 people. People want to have round tables with only 5 or 10 people instead of going to these huge events with thousands of people and just kind of the sensory overload. Um, and having those one-on-one conversations, I think we're seeing the rise again of that because people are starting to understand that the connection in smaller, deeper groups is actually more helpful than just constantly getting blasted with all of
Yeah.
this information, whether it's AI, whether it's search, whether it's billboards, right? Whether it's pop-up ads. But the deeper relationships with humans is actually I think, the antidote. Now, why
Mm.
people aren't seeking those out, that's a separate question. Lots of research on the loneliness epidemic and the isolation, and particularly with Gen Z about how they primarily communicate via text versus speaking to each other or even having phone calls, right? So I do think we are seeing that shift. And it'll be really interesting to see as Gen Alpha comes of age in high school and college and beyond, and how they shape those communication preferences.
Mm. Yeah, lots of things to dig into there, and I guess the question for me is how do you maintain those human connections? How do you keep those conversations, those experiences genuine, and integrate AI in a way that where it does add value and fact check it and as needed, of course. Um,
Yeah.
one of the things I discovered a couple of weeks ago, and this comes back to what you were telling me on our pre-call about you photographing these ceilings in Istanbul and then thinking, actually, I'm taking 100 photos here because I just can't get it right, or I could go buy a postcard and that would be perfect. This was, well, I discovered Google's Whisk, and I had a couple of photos. One of them was a sunrise that I took where I got some reflections on from the internal lenses, which is normal when you photograph into the sun. And because this was sort of such a surprise moment and I had to react quickly, I probably didn't do some of the things where you could minimize this. Anyway, short story. When I discovered Google Whisk, I thought, I wonder what it does if I tell it, give it this image and say, can you clean up these reflections, these artifacts that are there? And I have to say, I was just blown away. I looked at it and I thought, wow, that's going to be magic. That'll take care of some of these things that I've got. And then I had another image that I gave it, which was the entrance to the Fushimi Inari Temple in Kyoto, which is just a magical picture. But when we were there were thousands of people and it was impossible to get a shot without people. So I gave it this image that had people everywhere and I said, remove the people from this image. And it took 2 goes. Like it got 90% of them the first time. And then I said, okay, take that image and remove everyone. And then I got this beautiful image of exactly the shot I'd taken minus the people. And there was also a sign on the left that I didn't like. I said, take the sign out as well. And I thought, this is just amazing, this tool. And of course, then it prompted the question, what part of that photo is real? I mean, I took the original photo. There's a story behind both of those photos. But where is that lost now? And I had an interesting conversation yesterday on the podcast where the guest I was speaking to said something like, it's not just the creation now that matters, it's the context. And the context is going to become the differentiator. So, yeah, talk to us a little bit more about that, because I think the Istanbul ceilings and postcard is almost a metaphor for that.
Yeah. So one thing that's funny, I had a similar experience. One of the frameworks and analogies that I use for the buyer's journey is a playground. And so instead of this idea of a linear funnel where you go awareness, consideration, decision, you need to treat the buyer's journey as a playground where people can go up, down, sideways, etc. And there's a park near my house. And so I wanted a picture of a playground to use in my presentation. So I went to the park, I went in an off time, and I took this picture and I made sure there were no kids in the picture and basically no people in the picture because, privacy and especially with minors, It's a whole thing. And somebody mentioned to me, they were like, there's something off about that picture. Like, what is that, a real picture? Did AI, like, something's off about it. And so I was like, what do you mean off about it? Like, I took that picture. I don't understand what the problem is. And they were like, you know what? I just realized it's the fact that there's no people in it. Like, why does that playground not have any kids on it? And it was kind of unsettling. And I think it's the same thing, right? When you see like a lot of event venues and they give you this perfect venue with no people in it. And you're like, sure, that looks good. But how are my guests going to feel in this space? And it's the same thing. There's a couple folks. Oh, who is it that I follow on LinkedIn who is basically part of an agency that does a mix of AI and human photo shoots for brands, for like fashion brands. And there's something about seeing clothes on real people. And this is why a lot of brands have started adding videos where they walk and they move and they turn, because just seeing a shirt on a hanger or seeing, a dress on a static model, I don't know how it's going to move. Does the material swish? How is it going to sound when I am walking and like, oh, I'm going to now wear this to a wedding or a funeral and I'm going to be shifting in my seat and it's going to be swishing and making all of this noise, right? Like, I want to know if the material is going to be too loud, given that I want to wear this to a wedding or a funeral, right? So it's really interesting. I think we instinctively know that having a banquet hall with place settings for 100 people that's completely empty, there's something off about it, right? Like a playground with no children or clothes on a hanger. There's this concept of the uncanny valley where basically it's close enough to fool you on first glance. But as humans, we have evolved to notice the patterns and the gaps so that we can subconsciously know if something is friend or foe, right? If something's a threat, whatever. And so we see that from an AI perspective, and especially with a lot of the like humanoid robots, that are also, that's like the next generation of this is like, all right, we've got the generative AI. Now let's put it in a robot. And people do not like the humanoid robots because there's something just not quite right about it. And a lot of people don't like the AI generated videos because there's something just a little off and it's like the eyes are not quite right. And so even if you don't know that it's AI, you just it doesn't feel quite right. It's just a little, and I think that again, I think we are going to see a resurgence of handmade, artisan, handcrafted, right? Like we already see those words commanding a premium. And I think human made is going to end up being a premium offering. Because to your point, right? You know that you took that picture and you know that you did the editing and the prompting to get the humans taken out of it. But are you going to print that picture for your wall and then have someone be like, "Oh, where did you buy this?" Like, how
Yeah,
annoyed
yeah,
are you gonna be, right? That it's like,
exactly. Yeah.
"Why that I took that," right?
Hmm.
So, I do think it's gonna be interesting to see if having the humans or being very clear that it was primarily created or taken by a human is gonna start to command a premium. And I do think that we have always been a little skeptical of perfection. And now we just have more of a name, right? Like previously it was Photoshop. Oh, did you Photoshop that? Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Now we just say, oh, did you make this with AI? I had something on LinkedIn today it was a picture of a whiteboard and it was too perfect. And I was like, is that whiteboard like AI generated or photoshopped, or does somebody genuinely have that good of handwriting? And I didn't zoom in enough on the photo. Somebody else pointed out, they were like, given that the sticky note literally says sticky note on it, I bet it's AI, right? And I was like, that's hilarious. But I know, even though it was meant to look like handwriting, I was like, no whiteboard looks like that. Like the lines are so straight, the handwriting is legible, the letters are all like the right size. Like human did not make this, you
Yeah.
know? So now we just have more of a name for it to call it out as AI.
Yeah, yeah, that's fascinating. And you're right, because I had lots of people saying, "Did you Photoshop that?" And I said, "Well, I did process a little bit." So that this is before AI. So yeah, now it's going to be AI. And I think you make an important point there. And I've been kind of thinking about this and exploring this a lot in some of my photography work and in some of the writing I'm doing. And it's the idea of there is beauty in imperfection, and yes, the imperfection is natural in. So if there's a spelling error in my text, I mean, I try to avoid that as much as I can, and I do spell checkers and I do grammar checkers. So hopefully there won't be any, but that's kind of a level of perfection that's in some ways almost unnecessary, because you get these memes online where there's about 10 spelling mistakes for the whole sentence and it says read this sentence and you read it just exactly as it was intended to be written, regardless of the spelling mistakes. So it's that's just a trivial example, but the example of the reflections in the image, most photographers know that that's a real risk when you're photographing into the sun. And there are ways to overcome that by using filters and various things in the photography itself. And then there are post-processing tools like Photoshop where you can minimize those. But in terms of ending up with something that actually starts to not be representative of the experience anymore is where I'm struggling a little bit. Because to me, I see that photo and there's a whole story that is behind that photo, and immediately I'm just transported into that whole experience. And for my photography, it's always been every image tells some sort of story. There's a reason I took that image, and it might have been just like an instant decision. Oh, I saw that, bang, I'm take the photo. But then in hindsight, I can always say, well, that's why I took that photo, and that's what we were doing what I was doing at the time. This is who I was with, and this is the bigger context. Whether it's a overseas trip or whether it's a morning walk or whatever it might have been. So, yeah, I think there's a lot in that part of the imperfection.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I actually did I bake as I got into like cupcakes and cakes and that kind of thing during the pandemic. And so I've noticed when I bring my cupcakes in a bakery box, like just a plain white box, they're not super expensive, right? But when I bring it, people are always like, "Oh, where did you buy these? Which bakery did these come from? Oh my gosh, I'm shocked that you made them," right? And but the thing is the boxes are kind of flimsy, and so trying to, like, stack them is, it's just they're not that great unless you're gonna take one box and put it on a table. And so I bought a plastic, like, stacking Tupperware. And so I took that recently to a group, and I got way fewer comments of like, "You can open a bakery, right? Like, where did you buy these? These are amazing." Like, people were complimentary, right? But I got
Yeah,
significantly less surprise. And so I was like, my perception is that this box makes a huge difference, which is obviously the case, right? Like, again, there's a whole branding and packaging and design set of industries that recognize this. So I put something on LinkedIn and there's a picture of some cupcakes that I have that from a photography standpoint, it's like a really good shot. You got the lighting coming in from the side. I took it exactly above. The way the cupcakes are arranged on the plate is perfectly symmetrical. I have like tile on my countertop, and so it's like, perfectly centered with the perfect hash. Like it's a really good photo. But a number of people were like, and I said in there, I'm like, "Oh, I'm curious how this affects it. Make whatever assumptions you want about where they came from, if they're AI, who took the photos, whatever." And multiple people were like, "Well, I mean, that photograph is really good, but it kind of looks fake. Like, are those cupcakes fake?" No, they're not fake. It's just we're naturally kind of skeptical of too much perfection. And like I had done a really good job piping the decorations on the top. Like I had done a particularly good job on the cupcakes, right? And the photo didn't look real. And so people were actually more skeptical of it, even though objectively that was the best photo in the bunch. And therefore that should have made people think it was the best batch of cupcakes in the bunch, right? But they actually chose the ones in the bakery box, even though the photo was not as good. And frankly, the piping on the cupcakes wasn't as good. I know that because I can see. I know what was going on behind the scenes, but like, so it was a really interesting study, not just in which packaging makes the difference, but do you actually need a perfect photo or do you need the best that an amateur photographer can take? Right? Like there's definitely a threshold of quality where the photo does make a difference, but you almost want to know that I took that photo
yeah,
and that I am not a professional. I'm just using my phone, right? It's in my kitchen. But you want to feel like I made the cupcakes and I took the photo. I took a good photo. So
mm,
it's in Dr. Frances Fry did, she basically she's a Harvard professor and she made this trust triangle. And the three elements are logic, authenticity, and empathy. And so logic is basically, are you competent? Do you know what you're doing? Do you have knowledge? Authenticity is like, are you being honest and transparent or real? And then empathy is do you want the best for me, right? And I think that authenticity piece is that is a huge gap when we think about trusting people, when we think about, do I want AI generated content? Um, why do I not feel great about AI generated content, particularly if I don't know or if I'm skeptical that it was created with AI? That authenticity piece matters a lot. And so I think that's another gap in terms of, if you are using it, being transparent about how you're using it, why you're using it, you know, what gaps you see, or how you as the human augmented whatever the output was. I think that's going to be helpful, not just to your point of, we want just not the content, but the context.
Text, yeah.
And a piece of that context is the authenticity of how it was created.
Yeah. So it's not just the outcome; it's how we got there. What do you think in terms of marketing? Coming back to marketing, what do you think the implications of this kind of trust triangle, if you like, and the context being as important as the content, maybe even more? What implications does that have in marketing?
So we're already seeing influencer marketing is having a whole moment right now. Creator partnerships, brand collaborations, etc., are having, they're on the rise. They're having a whole moment, and this is different than like a celebrity endorsement. The celebrity endorsements, back in the day, it was very clear. Like, okay, Michael Jordan is, he may or may not be eating the Wheaties, but he's not, the best basketball player because he ate Wheaties, right?
Yeah.
We recognized that him being on the Wheaties box was not the endorsement that you think it was, right? But what we're seeing now is basically a lot of brands recognize that, people trust people like themselves, and they buy from people they trust. So showing the humans behind the company, behind the account, behind the product or service helps to build that trust. And they recognize as well that it's not just about the celebrity or the loudest voice or the most senior voice. It's about that credibility piece with your ideal customer profile, right? And so they want marketers to talk to marketers. They want product managers to talk to PMs. They want engineers to talk to engineers, right? So, um, from a marketing perspective, I think we are going to continue to see the rise of humans, human generated content, more transparency statements, and people who feel authentic to the audience versus primarily focused on brand generated content or celebrity endorsements, and those types of things. The rise of the thought leader, the rise of the subject matter expert, the rise of the influencer. I think we're going to continue to see that be very important, because it's not just about the knowledge, it's about where that knowledge came from. And did you go through a similar experience as me? Do you face the same problems I face? Not just, do I believe you that the outcome you're saying you got is true? It's like, I got to know that you're like me and we had a similar journey. So it's super interesting. You see this on um LinkedIn, you see it on YouTube, you see it on Instagram as well, TikTok, the rise of like less polished video. TikTok, it's like all over the place. There's the concept of the Gen Z shake, where they start the video and then they set it down on, the tripod or whatever. And that basically shows like, oh, I'm making this video and I'm
Yeah.
just doing it off the cuff, right? And so it's funny, because there was a whole thing about this. I don't know, it's been probably a year now, but there was a whole trend, basically like the millennial pause, and how millennials, they'll hit play and then they'll step back and then they'll say, "Hey, I'm Ashley," versus Gen Z is just like, "Hey, I'm Ashley and I'm doing this," right? So even that little tells, we humans are really smart and really adaptable. And so this sense of like, I'm just carefree, I'm like, whatever, has manifested in this like Gen Z shake, where it's like, that's how they make videos, is unpolished. They start talking immediately. They put the phone down. It doesn't matter if they're not perfectly in the frame, right? This kind of thing. Like, that's so common in TikTok videos and Instagram reels, but what I just did now, you were probably like, "What are you doing? Like, sit in a reasonable spot." I also am like, reasonable amount of space above my head and. So it's, I think we will continue to see, more emphasis on the humans behind the content and not just the words or the images that we see.
Yeah, that explains one of the videos I saw the other day. I actually found it a bit disturbing. It was sort of shaking all over the place, and then all of a sudden it steadied. So obviously they'd put it down on a tripod or on the desk, whatever it was. Yeah, it was funny. It reminds me though, there's a few videos that marketing videos of people I follow or organizations I follow where they do a very polished presentation on whatever topic it is, and it might be 2 or 3 minutes, and then at the end they do the blooper reel, which is always very funny, but it tells me two things. It tells me, first of all, they're not just reading a script, they've actually rehearsed it, and they obviously went through struggles until they got it right. And secondly, they're not so full of themselves that they don't show, hey, we messed it up a few times. And so there's that human connection element there just from that.
Yeah. It's so funny. I do musical theater as one of my hobbies, and stuff has gone wrong, on stage. Somebody didn't bring a prop or a costume zipper snapped or whatever it is, right? And it's interesting because most humans are not perfect on stage. Whether you're speaking, doing public speaking, presentation at a conference, something like that. And unless someone has just an overabundance of vocal fillers, you don't notice if somebody says or or right or you don't really notice that in the moment. And for some reason, when we're recording a podcast or we're recording a promotional video, we don't want to have any of those unnatural pauses. We don't want to have any of those vocal fillers. We don't want to have any of those kind of extra utterances that humans naturally have. And so you get into this uncanny valley territory where if I was to say the perfect thing all the time, then you think that, oh, I must be reading a script or I'm just here to spout my sound bites, right? The fact that I pause occasionally or I clear my throat or I have to take a sip of water. Those are natural human things that if we were in person talking one-on-one,
That's
nobody would blink an eye
probably.
at. But for
Hmm.
some reason on a podcast, it's like, "Oh, no, 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 we need to go back." What? Why would we do that? Like, just be normal?
Hmm.
And obviously movies are perfect and that kind of thing, right? But it's so funny the number of things that I have had go wrong in performances that I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this was so obvious." And then I ask, my friends in the audience and they're like, "Oh, no, I was
Yeah,
totally
didn't know
fine,"
that. Yeah.
Um, we had a scenario in one of my shows where somebody didn't enter. They were supposed to enter, they didn't come on. When the moment came that they weren't there, we were like, "Okay, well, guess we're gonna keep talking." And so to us, it was like this absurdly long, very obvious situation. And I asked my husband afterwards, I was like, "Did you see?" And he was like, "I kind of wondered if something went wrong. Y'all all got real quiet for a second, but I don't know. I just figured, I don't know." And like to me, I was like, this is just a huge faux pas. And for him, he was like, "Oh, I noticed something seemed a bit off for a minute, but it's fine." So again, this is to say, like, your comment about the misspelled sentences that you can still read, our brains are very good at being like, this is the pattern, this is what we're doing, and then they just fill in those gaps. So, it's yeah, we don't the blooper reels, I had I did one time for some reason, I don't know why I did this to myself. I named the presentation 4 content techniques to try in 2022, and even now, I'm like, I can't say it properly. I did probably 20 takes just trying to say the stupid title, and finally I was like, "Welcome to this presentation." because I couldn't do it. And so I posted, I was like, come here and see if I finally got a take where I said this stupid title correctly, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting. I do a lot of speaking and and coaching of people speaking, and often somebody will do a speech and they'll say, "Oh, I was really nervous at the start of that," or worse still, they'll get up and they'll say, "Well, I'm really nervous," or "I haven't really prepared as well as I would like," or they'll say afterwards, "Oh, I forgot a bit." And I always say, first of all, never start off by apologizing, say you're underprepared or say you're nervous, because we won't know. The audience won't know. And also, you're kind of pre programming your own brain to say, I'm going to mess this up. So that's the first one. And the second one is if you forgot something in your speech, don't worry about it during the speech. Just sort of keep the thread going. And nobody in the audience knows your script. So they won't know unless you stop and say, oops, I forgot something.
I feel like I've and even if you do stop and say that, it's weird. Like I've been in rooms where someone's like, "Wait a minute, nope, I forgot to say this. Go back 3 slides." And I'm like, "You don't need to do it." So, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is a fascinating conversation, Ashley. We could go on for ages talking all kinds of things. Um, Human creation, I think, and AI and imperfection, embracing imperfection. Uh, I'm just aware of the time, and I think it's a good point now where we move on to the Buzz, our innovation round. It's the same 3 questions I ask of every guest. It is focused on AI and, yeah, whatever comes to mind. So hopefully you'll inspire the listener to go and do something awesome today as a result.
I believe in maybe you with these questions. We'll see how much I believe in myself.
Okay, well, it doesn't need to be perfect, right? So, first one's around innovation. What's the most innovative way you've seen AI used to strengthen human relationships?
I think that the most innovative way, I don't actually know if this is very innovative at this point, it's quite standard, but I think from a marketing perspective, um, basically prompting it to behave as your audience to then evaluate messaging, positioning, taglines, et cetera. So saying you are this persona, um, you know, how does this land with you? Any concerns? That kind of thing.
Yeah, that's, I think, giving it a role and then testing out some ideas is a really good use of AI, and then taking it to the next step and saying, okay, I've refined this a little. Now I'm going to talk to some real people. All right. Based on your own experience, what's the best thing you've done to integrate AI in a way that enhances human connection?
So one of the things that I've used it for as a use case that I think is helpful and again, like gets me out of my own kind of echo chamber. I sometimes participate in debates at conferences. It's intentionally set up to give strong opinions on some topics in marketing. And so basically I use AI, I debate with myself and I debate with the AI. So I basically argue both sides of the argument and I ask it like, I think one of the funniest questions or most helpful questions is like, what's an argument if you're my opponent that you hope I make because it either makes me, look silly or it sets me up to fail, or you think it's just like so easy to refute that you'd be like, oh, I would love this argument. And while I'm using it for that specific use case, I actually think getting diverse opinions from AI. So basically saying like, here's what I believe and here's why I think I'm right. What do you think, AI? Am I right? Right? Like help me poke holes. And it's a really good way to explore other points of view that maybe you don't feel confident sharing or asking externally, but it's a really good way to kind of understand where you might have weaknesses in your argument or where you might have gaps in knowledge that could inform your perspective.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great application. And I did a similar exercise a little while back, and um, well, it was around the tariffs, the question of tariffs, and I thought, I've got strong opinions on this, but really, I'm not an economist. I'm not an expert in this, so I've probably got heaps of knowledge gaps. So I went to one of the AIs and I said, okay, I want you to debate me around the question of, are tariffs good? And I'm going to argue they're not good for the country imposing the tariffs on others. And I want you to argue the case that they are good. And I want you to give reasoning. And I don't want you to deviate from that opinion regardless, but I want you to be completely respectful, as factual as you possibly can. And so I did that. And we went on for ages. And I kind of tried to it was basically a debate, and an endless debate. And we got to the point where I thought, okay, it's going around in circles with its arguments now. So obviously there's nothing new. It didn't look like there was going to be anything new coming. And I was starting to get a bit exhausted. And then I did something which I found fascinating. I then went to it and I said, okay, I want you to argue exactly the opposite. I want you to turn around. You've had this epiphany now that you were wrong, I was right, and I want you to argue the other case. And I said, I'm not going to argue against you because I don't believe it, so I find it hard to kind of do it properly. And it said, yeah, I understand that, and here's how I'd argue it. And then it gave me like 60 to 70% of the stuff came back based on what I'd argued, but in a much more articulate way. And then it added about 30 or 40% of new information and new arguments that I hadn't considered. And I thought, oh, wow, yeah, I could use that. If I was in a real argument now or a real debate, I'd have some more material there. So I found that
Yeah.
a really fascinating exercise.
Nice.
All right, final question of the buzz round. What's the number one thing anyone needs to be developing? Any number one skill that we need to be developing today in the age of AI to keep our human-centered connection alive?
This is going to sound a little counterintuitive, but I would actually say skepticism. Um, don't there are this has been well covered in social science, anthropology, psychology, etc. But confirmation bias, survivorship bias, right? Recency bias. The skepticism that if immediately something makes you feel very strongly one way or the other, if you immediately see it and you're like, that's wrong. Whoa, let's take a step back. Let's understand, right? If you immediately see it and you're like, 100%, that's the only way to do it. Hey, whoa, whoa, let's take a step back. And I find myself doing this, particularly in a fairly divided political environment in the US and that kind of thing. In the age of AI, if I encounter something that makes me feel very strongly one way or another, I'm like, maybe I should take a second and go read beyond the headline, or maybe I should take a second and go fact check this. Maybe I should think about this a little bit more, right? If I hear numbers or I hear claims that I'm just like, that is shocking to me. Where did you hear that? Right? Like approaching it with a little bit of curiosity, a little bit of skepticism. That I think is going to be critical, not just obviously in the age of AI. I think it has been critical, but especially more with the ability to create videos and images and text with such frequency and such a low barrier to entry, being very mindful of what you consume, what is the source, does that make sense? And just having that sense of both skepticism. I guess I should modify skepticism and curiosity. The balance of those two, I think, is actually going to be the most critical skill.
Yeah, I was just going to say curiosity, I think for me is the big one, because I think AI has given us the ability to be more curious or to follow our curiosity much more. So I always was curious about stuff I observed. And when when the internet came along, I thought, this is fabulous. I can just type in, why do these flowers close at night, for example, and I'd get an answer back. But if it was a lot deeper than that, and I had an example a little while ago where AI gave me a hell of a lot more, and it was around, it was around one of my photographs again. It was an orchid that I'd photographed, and I gave it the photograph, and I said, "Can you tell me what what the name of this orchid is, what species it is?" And I would have done that with Google and Google image search, but I would have then said, "Oh, okay, I've got a Latin name and I've got a bit of a description of it," and that would have been everything. The AI came back and it gave me the name, it gave me sort of features of that particular flower, it gave me where it natively, what its native habitat was, but it also gave me its behavior, how it attracted insects, what kind of insects it attracted, and how those insects then pollinated, and a whole lot of additional information that I wouldn't have dug deeper on before because it just would have consumed too much time. And I thought, well, that really does feed a lot more curiosity. But then at the same time, the skepticism part is important. And I think recently I've seen lots of wildlife videos that I look at and I'd say, no. That animal wouldn't behave like that in the wild. That can't be right.
For sure. For sure.
All right. Well, thanks for getting us through the buzz, Ashley, and thanks for the conversation. It's been a lot of fun. And where can people find out more about you and the work you do, and maybe even reach out and say thanks for what you've shared today?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I would love to continue the conversation on LinkedIn. So that's where I spend my time hanging out, doing more content creation, and continuing the conversations in comments and DMs.
Excellent. All right. And of course, we'll have that link in the show notes so you can click straight through. So as we wrap it up, what's a specific action you'd like our listener to take from our conversation today, Ashley?
Again, a little counterintuitive, I would actually say call a friend. Somebody maybe you haven't talked to in a little while, it could be your sibling, whatever. But I would actually say, like, have a real conversation with a friend. Get coffee, have a phone call.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. Sounds good. And lots of things that you can talk to that person about. Excellent. Well, thanks so much for sharing your time and your insights and all those stories with us so generously today, Ashley. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and please do stay in touch. All the best for the future.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.